Did you know the Ancestral Kitchen podcast has a thriving online community? Patreon members love our private group discussion forum, away from the noise of mainstream social media. In this group, conversations brim with ideas, recipes, humor, and thoughtful discussion of member questions. There's a bonus exclusive podcast where Alison and I answer member questions and talk more informally about our kitchens and our lives. This private podcast also includes after-show tidbits with guests, everything we didn't dare say on the main feed, and all the extra stuff we couldn't fit into the primary episodes. There's a monthly live chat where we get together with members, and afterwards the recording goes up in the private podcast feed for members to listen in later. Come and be a part of a group that will befriend, encourage, and support you and your kitchen endeavors. We'd love to have you join us. Find all the details at ancestralkitchenpodcast.com.
Every month, Andrea and I record not only the episodes you listen to here, but also a special show for supporters of the podcast, that is, our patrons. The episode you're about to hear is one of these patron-exclusive shows from earlier in the year. In it, you'll get a taste of the sort of things we cover. We regularly talk about what's happening in our own lives, often sharing things we wouldn't in the main episodes, and we also, as you'll hear, answer really juicy questions from our patrons. If you'd like to continue to listen to these episodes, plus get access to a back catalogue of nearly 40 more, along with so many more interesting and supportive goodies, check out our Patreon community at patreon.com/Ancestral Kitchen Podcast.
Welcome to the Ancestral Kitchen podcast.
I'm Alison, a European town dweller living in England.
And I'm Andrea, living on a family farm in Northwest Washington State, USA.
Pull up a chair at the table and join us as we talk about eating, cooking, and living with ancestral food wisdom in a modern world kitchen.
Good morning, afternoon, time of day, Alison.
Whatever time of day it is.
I always start with morning.
Yes, good morning to you.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, because it's automatic, isn't it?
Yeah,
you know, you just go into the good mode, the good whatever, and it just pops out, I think.
Good day, mate. I guess I gotta get more generic.
Yeah, well, when we record the next KTC, I will be on slightly different time zone, but it will still be afternoon. So
yeah,
you need to practice.
It'll still be morning for me. So
yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. So
indeed.
So we're into June now, and we're actually recording this a little bit ahead. Not much, but a little bit ahead. Because by the time listeners are listening to this, possibly I'll have a baby or close to it. And we just didn't want to gamble with recording right around that.
Yeah.
And
exactly. And also, I don't know whether you'll be able to find me in between boxes. So, I don't know.
You'll be
It's a good idea.
Truly and well packed or packing or possibly traveling or possibly settling anywhere along that timeline. So, so we just had a really crazy June coming. So we're jumping on this a little early. And we are not doing a KTC live with our patrons this month, which is horrible because I will miss seeing everybody's faces.
Yeah, so would I.
Also so unpredictable because at the last minute, we might have had to say, neither of us can be there.
Yeah.
That would just be ridiculous. So, So we don't have a KTC live this month, but you do get to hear this special message.
Indeed. And we're also, because we're taking a bit of a break over the summer, we're not doing another one of these recordings now until the beginning of September. So there'll be no KTC in July and no KTC in August. But we will have lives in July and August. And I know, and you know, Andrew, because we've both seen the schedule for the podcast over the summer, that there are lots of really good after-show contents going up on the private podcast feed over the summer. So there'll be lots of current stuff to listen to. And I know from talking to quite a lot of patrons that they haven't gone back necessarily and been able to listen to all of the stuff on the private feed yet. So summer is an opportunity to dip in to one of the, I think, more than 70 recordings that we've got on this feed now, and explore that instead.
Yeah, go back
whilst
and
Andrew
listen.
and I try and get our heads the right way up again.
Yeah, one of the after shows coming out, it's in the end of August. It's the honey one. The after show's almost an hour long.
I know. I don't know what happened. I had to go, and I carried on like living my life. And I think you were still recording when I next phoned you up.
Yeah, I think so. It was really fun, though. The after shows for patrons who are newer and haven't scrolled through all the private feed yet, the after shows are usually pretty short, around 15 minutes, maybe at the most, because they're at the end of Alison and I recording with usually a guest, but I think, Alison, there are some with just you and me, right?
Yeah.
And what kept happening was we would finish a recording and then the guest would say something that I just wished that they had said on the recording that was so good. And I just felt like there was always something good that came at the end. So I started keeping the recording going, and then we would just make that into a little bit that went up for the private feed. And of course, we do get permission. We're not recording them without their consent. We do have permission from them to use those audios. And so we've
and often we've just got too much to say as well that we can't fit it in.
Yeah, I know that happened with Meredith. I think we had to ask her one of the questions afterwards because we just couldn't cram it into the actual schedule. And then Abby answered some questions after, I know, and Hillary. And so there's some good stuff on that private podcast feed. Excuse me, I got the hiccups.
And they're bite-sized, which is nice. You can just dip in for 10 minutes.
Yeah, but some of the shows on the private feed are full-length long ones, so check that out.
Like this one's probably going to be.
Yeah, I have a feeling.
Have you eaten this morning, Andrea?
No, this is the. Hopefully, by the time you're listening to this, I don't have this problem anymore. But it's just. I'm not really eating before we record much lately because it's just too risky for me.
Gosh, I feel guilty now.
Don't. It's just that I end up having so much trouble within it. It starts about 40 minutes after I eat, and so I just don't want to gamble with. Getting sick in the middle of an episode or something. So, and I didn't eat dinner last night either.
I was going to say, do you want to tell us what you had to eat last night?
Yeah. But well, the other problem is I can't eat before I go to bed. So,
yeah.
So I didn't want to eat last night. But Gary made this big pan he diced up potatoes and he cooked some of our pork sausage or chicken sausage. I can't remember which one it was, which has kidneys and livers and hearts and all kinds of things ground into it and herbs and whatnot. And then I don't know what all he diced into it. I heard him chopping up a whole bunch of stuff. While I was just on the couch, not feeling great. And I'm going to have some of that when I go upstairs. So,
okay, that's nice.
I do have a nice meal waiting for me, which is a good thing.
That's good.
And you ate lunch, right?
Yeah. I think for the second time since we've recorded this month, we had rabbit because I had to finish the rabbit that was in the freezer. This is the last bit of the rabbit.
It's a big
so
rabbit.
I got it out of the freezer last night, and I'm really kind of taken with a combination of fennel, celery and leeks at the moment in the cast iron pan in lard. And I think maybe I'm going overboard on it because England doesn't really do fennel. you can buy fennel in England, but it is ridiculously expensive. And so I don't really. Whereas fennel here is just like grass. It's just everywhere. Everyone eats fennel all the time. You can buy boxes of, like 30 fennels, and they're really cheap.
I didn't know that.
We went out with some friends last weekend, and we were explaining to them that they don't have fennel in England, and they were like, "What? Don't have fennel?" Like they couldn't imagine a world without fennel. So I think I need to grow fennel when I get a garden. But maybe I'm just kind of trying to make up for the fact that I don't think I'll have so much fennel in the UK. And so I fried up fennel, celery, and leeks, and the celery that we buy is always a massive, massive head of celery, and I'm not very good at using it. And it goes kind of wibbly quite early because it's not been packed with chemicals. And so I've been trying to do things with celery where I wouldn't have done in the past. I actually got the juicer out yesterday and had a juice as well. So I fried those things up in lard in the cast iron pan, and then I kind of pushed them to one side, and I had 2 bits of rabbit, and I put those down at the bottom of the pan. Fried the rabbit, kept turning it, kept stirring the veggies, and then I had white basmati rice with it on the side. Really simple.
Sounds
really
good.
Yummy. That's the last of the rabbit.
It's in your low histamine paradigm still, right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, because I'm still on that, and the reason I'm still on that is because I think I've identified that I do have a problem with histamine. The thing that I started it for has improved, although I don't think that's just because of the histamine. I think that's kind of faceted.
Yeah.
But the kind of slight side effect of it, although I kind of thought it might happen, is my sleep has improved. And I've been battling sleep for 30 years, I think. I mean, I cannot even begin to list the amount of things that Rob and I have researched and tried to do to improve my sleep. And although it's been up and down, just generally, since I've been doing the histamine diet, my sleep is better.
Wow.
And that feels like a huge, huge thing for me.
That is.
And so, considering how much upheaval there is in my life at the moment, I don't want to come off the histamine diet yet until I have time and headspace to do more research as to what is potentially causing me to have a problem with histamine. Because I remember when we lived in Cornwall, I had a DAO test. DAO is the enzyme that breaks down histamine. Oh. And sometimes people can have a histamine problem because their body doesn't produce DAO. But my DAO test was normal. So I know that's not the problem. And I have watched lots of kind of functional medicine YouTube videos, some on how to, what can cause histamine overload. And I know there are several causes. And so what I really want to do now is dive in to try and find out what is causing my seeming inability to be sleeping and other things with histamine, and then try to work on those. But because I'm moving and things are going to be changing over the next 4, 5, 6 months, and there's so much we've been doing so much for the podcast, trying to line it up and all of the stuff that I've just got no headspace at all to dedicate another portion of my energy to trying to figure out why being on a low histamine diet seems to improve my sleep. So I've kind of parked it. And that's a bit sad because it means I need to continue on the low histamine diet. But frankly, I take that at the moment because it just means that one thing is stable.
Yep.
And I've got used to it over 2 months, maybe it's been, I can't quite remember. And so I know what I can and what I can't do. And I know how I can fit it in with Gable and Rob. And I know that it's improved my sleep. And I just want to keep that the same as everything else around me kind of swims and changes. 100%. And then hopefully, maybe late summer, as things change, it will be interesting to take me out of this house environment that I'm in, because I think we've potentially got a mold issue here. Oh. And so moving might also swap things up a bit. and change things. And so I'm sure I'll be playing with a slightly different deck in a few months' time, and then hopefully I'll have more energy to deal with it.
Yeah, and that means wherever you do move to, you got to really make sure that there's, I mean, this mold isn't like you walk into a house and you're like, oh wow, look at that mold on the wall, you know?
Yeah, I know.
It's a little hard to tell.
I know that concerns me.
Yeah.
But we do what we can with what we've got and have that awareness and move forward with a different awareness to that which we had when we were looking for a house previously.
Yep.
So, I just, as everyone knows who's listening, tackling house problems requires so much headspace, dedication and energy. And I'll stick with this at the moment where I am, because that time is not now for me. It's really not. Yeah. Yep. So that was a long answer to, is that in your histamine? Is that in your histamine tolerance or whatever it was? Well,
I do know some of our patrons are also doing low histamine. So it's probably nice to hear somebody else talking about their experience too. So
I think at some point in the future, we'll talk about it more, because it was some of the things that I've given up were incredibly hard for me to give up psychologically.
Yeah.
And so that's probably a juicy discussion to have at some point.
Most definitely. Most definitely.
If you're into ancestral eating, you'll know that liver is a superfood, full of vitamin A, K, and a whole host of B vitamins, plus many essential minerals. It has an exceptional nutrient profile and is a staple of traditional healthy diets. But it's not always easy to consistently get liver into our lives. Finding a good supply, cooking it so it actually tastes good, and getting all of our family to eat it. These things can be hard, especially when we're busy or travelling. That's where Andrea and I turn to liver capsules. They give us all the benefits of liver without having to worry about the sourcing, the preparation, or the eating. One Earth Health produces organ capsules from 100% grass-fed New Zealand-raised cattle. As a podcast listener, you can get 15% off your first order and 5% off subsequent orders by using the link in our show notes. And each time you order, you'll also be supporting us to continue making this podcast.
Speaking of juicy discussions, that's all we have today is juicy stuff.
I agree.
We've got patron science experiment report. We've got a really good patron question from Amelia. I really like this question that she asked. And we are talking about beer as well. So what order do we want to take this in, Alison?
I think I'd like to start talking about the science experiments, stroke learning that Hannah has shared with us in the Discord community. And the reason I kind of wanted to highlight that here is because I know that we have a lot of patrons who aren't on Discord. It doesn't suit them, or they don't like that kind of thing. And I want to be able to share really interesting things that have happened on there through this different channel, and let the other patrons know about it. So, it's really interesting because it's something that I'd not come across. So shall I kind of try and summarize, if I can, what the situation was?
Yeah. And I'll also say to the patrons who aren't on Discord yet, if you just haven't got on because you're intimidated, which was me when I first joined Discord, I joined it and then I didn't get on for a year. It's worth, I finally figured it out, made the effort. And now we have our Discord, and it's worth it. It's fun. It's such a good place. And I know everybody who's on the Discord, when we ask them what they love about being a patron, they say that is one of their favorite things. So we would love to have you join us if it does feel like it would suit you. It's just a really fun place.
Yeah.
So yes, let's talk about Hannah.
And you don't have to come on it all the time.
Yeah.
You just come on it when you feel like it as well.
And Hannah's in Belgium, right?
That's correct. Yeah. Hannah's in Belgium, and she loves experimenting. She's made suans. She's done all sorts of kind of experiments. And she started making rye kvass to the recipe that's on my blog that I'll put in the show notes. And she encountered a problem that it kind of went gloopy, and she called it snotty. I mean, that's a better way. I can't think of a better way of describing it.
No, she said it was like snot. So
yeah. And she didn't know why. And she asked me, have you ever come across this? I was like, no. And I know I'm not the only one who's made my rye kvass recipe, because, you know, people who follow me have told me that they've made it and they love it. And I've never experienced this. I've never heard of it at all. And so we kind of thought, well, maybe it was the sugar, maybe it was the bread, maybe it was being cross-contaminated from other ferments she had. And so she tried with a different bread to start with, and that made no difference. The same thing happened. She still got this kind of snotty, clear sort of gel that appeared in the mix, and that was thick, so it trapped the bubbles of the ferment that were coming up. So she had a kind of a layer of several centimetres at the top where you could see all the little bubbles that were just sort of caught in this gel, clear gel. And so she went away and did some research, and she came back and said, this looks like it's a leuconostoc bacteria overgrowth. And I was like, what?
Yeah, I think we all were like, what?
And
say that again.
She shared a video with us talking about it, and I will try and put that video in the show notes too. And leuconostoc should be a very short phase in a ferment before the lactic acid bacteria take over. But in her ferment, it seemed to be that it was just kind of stuck in this leuconostoc phase. And she did research into leuconostoc and what they do, and they make dextran from the sucrose. And dextran is a branched carbohydrate, which is why it thickens her kvass, is what she explained. So she did set up this experiment where she did 3 different types of kvass, one with honey, which doesn't have the sucrose in it, which is needed to make that dextran, one with white sugar with raisins in to give some more yeast and bacteria, and one with evaporated cane sugar, which has extra minerals, to see if those minerals would help kickstart the lactic acid. And what was absolutely fascinating was that she came back with a success. And out of the 3 experiments that she did, the cane sugar was the one that came out on top. So she said adding raisins to the white sugar simply made the snot come more quickly. But the evaporated cane sugar and the honey both did what they were supposed to. But the honey took longer to go. And I would kind of concur with that, because I know when I make mead, honey takes a long time.
Yeah.
So she's going to be using evaporated cane juice for her rye kvass now on. And what was interesting was that the difference in the evaporated cane juice is that it's got more minerals in it. And so what her kind of conclusion from it was, she said, is a beautiful rebuttal to those who say that natural sugar is just sugar. Because here, it apparently supports a completely different ecology. And I thought that was a wonderful thing, wonderful experiment to do, that she had the space and the time to do it.
Great observation.
But that kind of learning that a sugar that does have minerals in it, a darker sugar as opposed to white sugar, some people would say, oh, it's still sugar. But no, it's not, because when she makes rye kvass with that sugar, she doesn't get that leuconostoc bacteria. She gets it working as it should do. And so therefore, those minerals are doing something. They're doing something to the yeast and bacteria. And it's just amazing. I think it was absolutely amazing. And I thank Hannah very much for doing that experiment and for enlightening all of us on Discord first, and now everyone who's listening to this, with that learning. So, if you get snot.
All in the interest of making a delicious beverage. And we all learned something crazy that I don't think I've ever run across in any of the books I've read on fermenting.
No, exactly. So, I was wanting to bring that because I know that people do have issues when they're fermenting, and Hannah has such a clear head and space to be able to actually take that and do a science experiment with it and teach us all something in the process.
Yeah.
So
this was amazing. And I think it made everybody want rye kvass as well.
Yeah.
It's just fun seeing all her pictures because she posted pictures too.
Yeah, we saw the pictures.
We can't show you, on audio. And if you've been listening for long, or you're a new patron, then maybe you should know that Francine had an experiment as well, and we ended up taking that to Sandor Cats, and that's in the after show with the King. If you go back and listen to that one, then you can hear when he scolds me and Alison, and also helps us solve our problem. And Francine had posted a whole TV Coast experiment. Yeah. And she did the pictures. Yeah, she did the same thing. She had like loads of jars going simultaneously, trying it like this, trying it like this. It's amazing. Yeah. And it's cool because no one of us has the time to try all these things, but between the group, then I don't know if you saw, Alison, the other day I posted in the vegetable thread or whatever it's called. I never know what the right terms are for Discord. In the vegetable discussion, the gardening discussion, I said, hey, everybody, let's just see what we're growing between all of us. So everybody started posting their lists. Yeah, it was crazy. And then yesterday I was thinking about it and how interesting it was to see what everybody had. And I thought, what animals does everybody have? So between all of us, everybody posted all their animals. It's just so cool thinking about, between this group, how many different things, creatures, vegetables, fruits, everyone's growing. It's quite a lot of experience when you combine it all. So really fun.
I'm in awe of a lot of the patrons who are on there, for sure.
I know.
Okay, should we talk about beer next?
Let's talk about beer because we love beer.
Okay, indeed. So what I think I want to do is just quickly recap that we've talked about beer before, or ale before. So it all started with podcast 54, which was called What Have We Done to Beer and What Can We Do About It?
It all started with podcast 54.
It all started. It actually all started with Sandor Cats.
That's true.
Which is interesting. Again, another Sandor Cats, the king. So if you haven't listened to that podcast, go back and listen to it, because that kind of details my journey from Sandor Cats' original recipe for Boozer, a 5,000-year-old Egyptian ale, and how I started experimenting with that and how that opened a door to me doing a ton more research onto ale and beer and fermented malted grain drinks, and then leading to me doing loads and loads of kitchen experiments with it.
And it's a great episode.
I love that episode.
Many people say it's their favorite.
Yeah, go on.
I was just going to say that many people say it's to me, I had told you already before that I thought it was, definitely one of our top episodes.
Thank you.
And then when we had done a poll of patrons in Discord, then that one kept coming up. People saying that was one of the ones that they liked the best.
I really enjoyed recording it because it was literally like 2 years' work that I condensed into an hour.
Yeah.
So it felt really rich for me and with information.
Yeah.
So that kind of led me up to the point where I was making medieval English ale in my kitchen. And I have a blog post called Medieval Ale in a Modern Kitchen, which I'll link in the show notes, which explains the kind of background around what medieval ale is, how it's not beer, what the differences between the two are, how it's different to how we would make beer or ale today, and how ale was and always has been the preserve of women until industrialisation. That blog post goes into that in quite a lot of detail. We've also got a couple of KTCs on this topic. Number 17, I talked about my beer making, and then just very quickly after that, Rob and I recorded a kind of a special about our ale making and the research that I'd done, the books that I've read, and that was quite informal because it's just me and him chatting at the kitchen table. And that leads us to the post that I put out on my blog this week, which is called Becoming a Brewster, How I Make Medieval English Ale in My Kitchen. Brewster is the term that was used for female brewers in the past. And this post is different to the previous posts in that it's really practical. And it details out exactly what I do to make this English ale in my kitchen. And basically it goes through making malt, what I do to make the malt, because I make my own malt. I don't buy the malt in. And explains how to make malt, and there are some pictures in there. And then it talks about what to do on the day when you're actually making the beer, how to make what they call the mash. You take that malt and you put it in with hot water. I talk about how much water I use, how much malt I use, the timings. And then it talks about once you've made that liquid, which is called wort, which has the sugars from the malted grain in it, what I do next in terms of what type of yeast I use, why I use that yeast, how much of it I use, and what I do when I'm ready to pitch the yeast. Then it talks you through how many days I leave it to ferment. There's pictures of it after a day and after another day. It will show you all the equipment that you need to do it, all the timings that you need to do it, what to expect when you drink it, and then how to treat it afterwards once the fermentation's happened. So the reason this is up on my blog is because I've been doing this for, I think, 3-4 years now, and I just haven't got round to writing it up. And I feel I really wanted to do it service by writing it up, but also because I want to put it out there and say to anyone who's interested in doing it, which I know a lot of patrons are, please go ahead. This is how I do it. Have a go at it. Come on to Discord and ask me questions, or come on to Patreon and ask me questions if you want to, and see what you think. See how you enjoy the process. See what you think of the beer, what you think of the taste compared to the beer that you find in the shops, because it's very, very different. Mm-hmm. And then what does it prompt in you? What do you want to do? Do you want to try making it with shop malt? Maybe you haven't got the time to use to make your own malt. Okay, well, have a go with shop malt. Try using some of the other malts that are available commercially, some of the darker malts if you want. Try adding different things to it. Try doing it at a different temperature. Try whatever you want to, whatever it prompts in you. You know, like you were saying, Andrea, none of us has time to do everything. But if one of us can put out something as a base that stops everyone else having to do 4 years of research, then they can just play with it. And that can feed back to me, hopefully. Because as far as I know, no one's making ale like this. People are making medieval ale, but they're doing it with commercial yeast, not with home cultured yeast. And it would have been made with home cultured yeast, because commercial yeast didn't exist in medieval England, as we've discussed. And so I feel like this should be out, available, and I want as many people as possible, if they're interested, to play with it and make it more than just me in my kitchen and my 4 walls.
Yeah. I can only imagine.
Do you have questions?
Yeah. I can only imagine with all the patrons doing this, the kinds of, everybody's in different, we have patrons all over the world, and they're in different climates, different temperatures.
Yeah.
On the bottom of the world.
Different grains.
Exposure to different grains. Not everybody has access to the same foods. So we see lots of adjusting and things like that. And then getting that many people commenting and sharing what their experience is. I want people to taste it, because it just doesn't taste like normal beer. And some people have come to the house here and they've tasted it and they've said they like it, but I don't know whether they're just being polite, really. But it is different. It is a very different flavour to normal beer. It is a very different consistency to modern beer, and yet it is a beer that
was part of English culture for a lot longer than the beer that we drink now in England, that men drink now. And it was made in people's kitchens, in women's kitchens by women.
And it's much lower alcohol as well, which I know all of this we discuss on episode 54 if you want to hear about.
Correct.
What about beer bellies and everything? Oh yeah, go check out that episode. But
correct.
It's something that, entire families were drinking. And I'm almost to the end of Kristen Lavransdatter, the Sigrid Undset trilogy, the Norwegian epic. It's 1,000 pages long, all combined. And it's a medieval, it's the 14th century medieval story about this woman, basically. And the ale is everywhere. I mean, she's always brewing, or somebody's brewing something, or she's stirring it, or somebody's pouring it, or they're drinking it, or they're opening the Christmas barrel or something. Just ale is everywhere. It's part of the
Norwegian beer. Norwegian brewing is so rich. It's still happening in Norway. There's a guy called Lars Garshaw who's written a book called Farmhouse Brewing Techniques, Historic Farmhouse Brewing Techniques, I think it's called, which I've read and pored over. And I went back in it recently to look up something, and I thought, I really want to read this again because I've done other things since the last time I read it, and I just want to go back into it. And he has found a culture there called kvass, which was a farmhouse yeast that was passed from person to person to person. And he has done incredible work trying to document how this yeast was made, how it's used, how it is still used, and how it was used in the past. And he took it to, they found, I think, 4 or 5 different kvass cultures from different parts of Norway. And they took it into a lab. And I heard him say that, when you buy a commercial strain of yeast from a beer company, you're getting one yeast strain. And yet, when they put this kvass in a lab and testing it, there were tens and tens of different yeast strains in it. I mean, literally, it was teeming with different yeasts and bacterias. And yet people are using kvass from a lab now and making, in quotes, kvass, but it's just one yeast strain. And it makes me just realise the incredible ecology of home yeasts and how little we must be aware of what those yeasts and bacteria do in symbiosis together in a beer, because Rob and I have, as we talked about on that podcast, noticed how we just don't get hangovers in the same way. It affects us differently, it affects our digestion differently. And I'm sure that's because of the multitude of things that are growing in our starter, rather than the one isolated thing that's been put into a sterilised environment. And Norwegian brewing has so much to teach us, and it is part of the world where it's still very much alive, making home kind of farmhouse beers with home yeasts, and that's really exciting because it's gone in England, it's gone in England, but it's still alive in Norway.
That's amazing. And I'm thinking about everything that I've just been soaking in this book as you're saying that, and thinking about how when you're brewing in these families were living in hundreds of year old buildings, and there's animals outside, and there's all kinds of different people, servants or, people who lease holders or people who work on the land, peasants, just tons of people all the time coming through. And it just, the exposure, all the different bacteria and yeasts and things that would be floating through the air, everything that's growing outside, all the different trees, the different flowers, the different seasons. And then if you did have one isolated bacteria, that could be a potentially fragile brew that couldn't
completely
hold up to all those things. And then, as we saw with Hannah's snot formation that she made, if you had a modern version of sugar, say, for making the rye kvass, which is what, she had the trouble with, then that modern version doesn't translate back to that older recipe, because
completely.
the older recipe relied on cofactors that we may not be fully aware of. And so it's interesting to me when you when you and Rob said you don't get the hangovers, you don't feel the same, you don't get the beer belly and the bloating and things like that, then you think, okay, there's more going on here, but we just scrapped it in order to have this perfectly clear, foamy topped drink that tastes the same anywhere in the world, anywhere you pick it up. How boring.
No, we scrapped it to make money. Unfortunately.
Like everything.
Indeed. I've been saying indeed a lot. Okay. If you've got any other questions about the beer, or you don't want to say anything else.
Called Historical Brewing Techniques, The Lost Art of Farmhouse Brewing, because I looked it up while you were talking.
That's the one.
Okay.
That's the one. It's in the podcast bookstore.
Oh, yes.
So if you're interested in reading it and you want to not patronize Amazon, then that's another option that you can get it from. It's a wonderful book. Absolutely wonderful.
It looks great, especially on the heels of what I've been reading the last 2 weeks.
Yeah.
In your post, I wanted to point out that you put a calendar or schedule, basically, so somebody could picture, hey, if you started it on this day, here's approximately because there are a lot of steps, and a lot of them, like with Ancestral Food, you kind of set it and then, 24 hours later, it's ready. So a lot of the steps take time. And then you also put these really nice pictures of making bread with spent grain, which is such a good idea. So instead of, throwing it out, which would be so painful, you could probably make some really hearty pancakes or waffles out of that too, couldn't you?
Yeah.
Nice too.
Yeah, I have put it in pancakes before. And I certainly love experimenting with breads with it. I've made a kind of a sort of pumpernickel style rye, which was 100% rye with lots of the spent malt grain in it and some molasses and some spices. It was kind of tasted a bit like a malted loaf. It was delicious. And then I put it in spelt breads as well in various different portions. It's a wonderful thing to experiment with in your bread making, for sure. Yeah. Yeah,
it looks really good. What did you put in this bread in the picture? Raisins or something?
I think that might be the pumpernickel one, in which case it's got raisins in it. Yeah, it
looks really good.
Raisins and molasses.
When you spend, again, in that Kristen Lavrensdatter book, everybody's growing grains and hay and things like that. And the entire year is centered around the harvest and if there's good weather and, praying that the harvest is good and all these things. And you just can't imagine somebody taking the buckets of spent barley and just throwing it out after you centered the last 365 days of your life on growing it and getting it ready. And this is one of the coolest aspects of ancestral food is its resourcefulness and the lack of waste, because ancestral food is built on basically starvation economy. And so you ain't throwing stuff away. So I love that you made the bread out of it.
Absolutely.
It's beautiful.
Hey, you washing the dishes. Been there. You've heard Alison and I talk over and over about her love of rye sourdough bread. Well, I might actually call it an obsession, but that's neither here nor there. Now you can make Alison's rye sourdough in your own kitchen with her as your teacher. And she's a really good teacher. Rye is economical, it's delicious, and full of nutrients and low in gluten. There's a reason why it has been a darling of bread bakers for centuries. Make it into sourdough, as Alison will show you in her course, Rye Sourdough Bread, Mastering the Basics. and you've got an amazing, tasty, and nutritious staple in your kitchen. It's traditional and it's nutritional. In this course, you'll learn everything there is to know about how she creates and maintains her rye sourdough starter, all about whole grain sourdough rye, including the key differences between baking with rye and wheat, how to make 2 loaves, an everyday rye sandwich bread, and a delicious Russian-style dark rye loaf, and what to do with your sourdough discard, including video walkthroughs for sourdough pancakes and a tasty, sweet, spiced cake. Head to www.ancestralkitchen.com/rye.
I know
Wonderful.
I have a friend who makes elderberry syrup, and after she makes it, she strains out the berries and then she puts those in a sourdough loaf. So she has an elderberry bread.
I've remembered making elderberry last year, and I used the berries afterwards for various things.
Yeah.
I remember putting them in porridge that I cooked for Gabriel, because you've still got these berries and they've still got flavour in them.
Yeah.
So, you know, like you said, it just feels so wrong to throw it away.
I know. And it's crazy how many modern recipes, like the term sourdough discard, like you're going to discard it. Like there's so many things where they say just throw it away or cut off the ends, throw them away. What? I'm not throwing that away.
Yeah, well, exactly. And I think, you know, we've done kind of podcasts that talk about the idea of zero waste in many different ways. Mm-hmm. And the bokashi one's kind of springing to my brain now.
That's
that, you know, even with vegetable scraps and your leftover tiny bones and eggshells and things like that, you can use the wonderful bacteria to make that into compost, which will give you wonderful veg in your garden for the next year. So it's really, there are a myriad ways to make things circular and to use them again and again and again. Yep. And
I mean,
once you've unlocked those, you can't throw things away.
No. And we've had you've said some on the podcast, but I know we've had entire meals made out of what essentially is trash and all pieces that would have been thrown away. And that all feeds back into that comment that you and I both hear all the time. I just couldn't afford to eat like that. And part of it is because our waste culture is extravagant. So you and I have discussed this, and I know it's also mentioned on the Sir Patrick Holden episode, which I don't remember what number that was, but if you just type Patrick into the podcast search, his episode will pull up. But he talked about how 50% of the food is thrown away, or maybe you brought that up as a question. And his opinion, which I think is not wrong, is that it's because the food isn't good to start with. And there's not a lot of motivation possibly for figuring out how to sparingly use your Wonder Bread crusts or something. Yeah. I don't know. And when your food is really good, you have no interest in throwing it away. Like none.
Yeah. Yeah, because you value it. It's a whole different value system, isn't it?
And then that affects,
value that you give to that.
Yeah, that affects how much you buy. Like this kind of ale, are you going to just drink a 6-pack of it at night? Probably not, you know?
That's the same with the chocolate that I make, you know, that I've bought those beans and I've roasted them and I've shelled them and then I've ground them and I've got the fat and I've made it into chocolate and I've waited for them to set. And therefore, they're so precious and so beautiful that there's no way in the world that you'd sit there and eat 6 or 7 of them. You know, you're just going to eat one.
Yeah, your face would blow
because you value them, you know, in a completely different way.
Well, I've had them because you've actually mailed me some. So I know. Yeah. I know, and I can say it's true. Plus, it's pretty intense. A lot of ancestral food flavors are, you know, that's another interesting topic someday, Alison, which is that everybody wants really tender food that they don't have to chew. Everybody wants really hyper flavorful food, hyper salted or hyper sweet. because of how our palate has been so well shaped by the food industry. And yet when I eat ancestral food, to me, it's so much more intense and the flavors are genuine. Like if you have tens upon tens of different bacteria in an ale, you have a complex flavor profile versus if you just have this one manufactured malt and this very blah grain, and then you ferment it with one bacteria. That's all you're tasting. And for some people, that is the shock of coming into ancestral food, is how the food is so much more flavorful and diverse. But then once your palate, and this has come up in Discord many times, once your palate starts to adjust towards these flavors, which it does quickly as your gut begins to adapt as well, you just cannot go back. And everything else tastes like garbage. And you know it now.
Yeah, I agree.
Now you know that it tastes like garbage.
And yet, I find frustrating often about ancestral foods is that if someone comes to my house and I'm preparing something for them, I am really tempted to add in more things because I know that their palate is not the same as my palate. And when they taste what I put on the table, they're probably going to be underwhelmed by it because they can't appreciate it in the same way because they've just eaten a Mars bar and several other things with, chemicals in them and highly spiced and just stuff that's going to make them want to eat more of that stuff.
Yeah.
And so their appreciation of real food because they've been eating that, hasn't had a chance to settle and develop.
Hasn't got to thrive yet. Yeah, that's actually.
And yet I know how good that food is.
I know.
I mean, sometimes I'll pull out some recipes that I know they're going to love anyway, but still, if they eat the things that we have every day, the flavors that I find in those foods compared to how I would have enjoyed those foods, 15, 20 years ago, absolutely incomparable. Just incomparable.
Oh, I'm with you on that. That's something Gary and I observed. So we've had, as you know, a number of different people. So far, actually, every year, a group or two different groups of families have stayed out here on the farm for some time, ranging from weeks to months. And it takes and everybody has been exposed to my Instagram account. So they're like, oh man, your food looks so good and everything. And what's interesting is it takes about 3 days and then they have to go buy a bunch of food. And our food is just not as intense in terms of a Pop-Tart, it's like an oat cake. To me, there's that sour tanginess. I'm thinking about the oat cakes that's fermenting on the counter right now. There's that tanginess. I keep some of the grains kind of whole, so there's like this chewy aspect to it. Then I cook it on lard or butter, so you've got these crispy kind of edges and these little brown pieces. Sprinkle a little bit of coarse salt on it, so there's this little burst of salt every bite or two, and then we're going to shred on top of it just a simple meat, something that we grew and cooked, a meat you have to probably chew, or liver or heart or something like that.
Yeah.
And then come on, this garlicky, tangy, spicy sauerkraut on top, and then some really mild raw cheddar shredded. So to me, I'm thinking, there's all these, there's the crunchy, there's hot, there's cold, there's spicy, there's a really mild. I know. It's just bliss. And yet it's not a cool range Dorito.
Yeah.
It's not a super duper, ooper looper, cheesy Cheez-It or whatever. And it doesn't scratch that itch. That is so
it's been programmed in.
Yeah, it's just how we've been raised to eat by our culture. And people like it for a day or a couple days, but then they need that satisfaction from something.
Yeah.
So it'd be interesting to hear patrons talk about that. Maybe pop that in the Discord.
Yeah, I'd be interested to hear their experiences.
More discussion on that, because that's always interesting hearing people say, sometimes one person in the family is fully moved over and another hasn't.
Yeah.
Or the kids are still adapting or something. And so there's sort of these transitional phases where people are saying, yeah, we're making a lot of this. I'm the only one that eats it. Or,
Or the kids are at school and being exposed to that sort of food at school every day, and then coming home and we're like, what's going on here?
Yeah,
that's a really tough one that I've seen a lot.
I forgot about that, but that is definitely a challenge that, makes. And this is not the reason to homeschool, but sometimes I just think I'm so glad that we homeschool because they don't have to cope with.
You don't have to deal with that.
Yeah, the kids seeing other kids' lunches or asking questions or saying, why do they have this? And they just don't have to deal with that, which is kind of nice.
Yeah. Mm.
So that's fear,
Amelia's question. Yeah. Amelia's question kind of fits into this really nicely because it's kind of talking about that.
Let me go open up her question.
Interaction. Do you want to read it?
Sure.
Excellent.
I don't have a lovely accent like you and Amelia have, so I'll just have to read it.
Amelia's a patron who lives in Wales in the UK, which is what Andrea's commenting on.
Yeah, when we all listed our animals, I'm like 9 guinea fowl, whatever, 100 chickens, and then she comes on 10,000 bees. Like, yeah, you definitely win the quantity. So she's got a beautiful garden, and she's got bees and chickens and yeah. Anyways, and an aga.
Don't get me jealous about.
She said, "What can we as individuals do to make those around understand that we need to eat better, cook better, and make better food choices, and not be influenced by advertisements?" The first step is to point people in the direction of your podcast, of course. But more generally, how do we influence change as individuals? I've tried nagging. I've tried sharing information. I've tried sharing recipes and skills. And I've even tried guilting my family, who are considerably wealthier than I am, into supporting local butchers and other local food producers rather than Waitrose or Aldi. But it's like talking to a brick wall sometimes. I'd be really interested to hear yours and Andrea's take on it, how to change the minds of those who don't want to listen. That's such a good question. There's a lot of layers there, but that is a really good question.
Yeah.
And I've thought about it a lot since she sent it to you and you shared it with me. Which is, it's one of the useful aspects of having pregnancy insomnia sometimes is
you can sit up and think.
So that I've listened to episodes on the Joe Rogan show.
Yes.
Whatever it's called, the Joe Rogan Experience. And he was talking to, there's an episode, patrons have actually mentioned it too, a more recent one where he talked to Will Harris and Will's daughter, Jenny. Yeah. So I listened to his initial interview with him way back, but this is a more recent one.
Okay.
And it's quite good. Quite good. I recommend it to anyone on the podcast because they run over a lot of topics that we've talked about on here. But something that they discussed on there was because Joe Rogan asked too, what is it going to take to get people, like people don't see this. They don't care or they're not aware. Not being aware is a big part of the problem, but obviously Amelia's trying to make people around her aware. Yeah. And he said, unfortunately, it's going to have to be very painful and probably quite bad before a lot of people will change. And I just thought, oh man, that's kind of true.
See, Chris Mage says that in his book, and
I know.
We talked about it in the interview that we've got this opportunity to change now. Let's take it and do something with it before it becomes really nasty.
But that is not human nature. Unfortunately, we often wait until the change is inevitable, as they say. We wait until the pinch is so bad, and that is part of the problem of all these fast fixes that we just keep generating, through science or whatever, all these little patches, because they're assuaging the pain and dulling it so that we don't know how bad it really is. But then you hear people say things like there's only 60 crops left in that dry, dusty soil out here in our American farmland. And if we keep treating it the way we're treating it. However, Will Harris had his book is what is this book?
It's in the podcast.
The Art of Giving a Damn or something like that.
I think you put it in there.
Yeah, it's in the podcast bookstore. I pre-ordered it before he had it out, and so it came automatically, and I read it immediately. And I just think he does such a good job sharing, because something that he said was, there's a lot of really good regenerative farmers out there, and that I love Joel Salatin and other farmers that I've shared about, but there's not very many like Will, who used to be fully bought in to the chemical lifestyle. Joel never went down that route. His dad farmed differently, and his dad started nurturing land, and then Joel started doing it after him, right? Well, Will Harris was he saw his dad start using the chemicals that came out after the war, and he likes to say, he says, I was an abuser. If it said use a little bit, I used 3 times as much. And so he said he saw very quickly and with more acuteness than possibly other farmers would how bad it was, because he was accelerating his program basically by overusing things.
I see.
And he switched into a regenerative program, if you want to call it that, some 20 years ago from the point of recording this in 2024.
Yeah.
And it has not been a short or easy road for moving over. But anyways, that episode, worth listening to. And he's right. It was very bad for him when he switched, right? Like it took pain seeing things not being right, not being, and he wasn't just saying, oh, it's kind of okay. I guess I'll switch. Like, no. And I feel like Amelia said, I've tried nagging, I've tried sharing information, I've tried sharing recipes and skills. I've even tried guilting my family, who are considerably wealthier than I am. And a few things in that phrase there. One is that it doesn't matter how wealthy people are. It doesn't necessarily translate into them valuing their food, which is weird to you and I, who are carefully allocating, so much of a resource into finding good food.
Yeah.
And you think if you had so much more resource, then wouldn't it be even easier? But that's not necessarily how it works. I was talking to my friend Jennifer last night, and she was saying, she was taking this, like it's a marketing training that she's taking. And the guy said, it's never about the price.
Oh, no, not at all.
It's never
about the value.
Mm-hmm.
It's about what you value and the emotions around it.
Yep. And you think somebody might say, I don't buy grass-fed beef because it's too expensive. But that's actually not why. It's actually not because it's too expensive. And that probably sounds really weird to say. But when Jennifer said that to me, then I started thinking, okay, like if you told me right now, you could get this beautiful couch for $3,000, I'd be like, yeah, that's way too much. I'm not buying that couch. Mm. If you told me right now, your child needs this life-saving operation and it will cost $50,000, I'm like, do it. I'll come up with $50,000.
I'll find the money.
There is no price too high. And it just made me think, okay, yeah, you're right. It's not about the price. It's like, I don't care about the couch. I don't want the couch, And I'm not being flippant. Obviously there's fun things I would love to do that, well, I've got broth, so we're not going to get out. We're not going to go buy a steak or something. I'm still figuring out how to do things within a budget or whatever. I'm not just saying that I'm just randomly blowing money on expensive food or something. I still find way, but I guess to what I'm saying is the considerably wealthier part. It literally doesn't matter at all. And I don't know if it's the same in the UK, Alison, but here in the United States, there's this weird food culture thing that we've talked about before, which is no matter how rich somebody is, they still brag about if they got food for cheap. It's like, oh yeah, I got this. It was, I guess how cheap all this was, 30% off, whatever. Mm-hmm. And there's this whole, like bragging about how cheap food could be had or whatever. And you and I probably just listen to those conversations and button our lip because we don't want anyone to know how much we spent on a chicken or something. But
I was thinking, that Gabriel went to visit with the school on Monday. He went to visit a place that makes an artisan place in Florence that makes upholsters chairs and makes furnishings. And he had an absolutely fabulous time. He loved it. And this company makes kind of one-off pieces that sometimes they just salvage the bones of a chair from a bin.
Oh, wow.
And then they'll bring that chair back to life, reupholster it, and then get the most sumptuous fabric ever and upholster the chair in it. And he was describing to me some of the fabrics that were there, how richly floral they were. If you can imagine kind of a, the sort of fabric that might grace a Florentine palazzo. They had gold thread in them, so much gold thread and all these flowers and how thick they were and silk. And he was saying they told him how much some of these things cost per meter, and that people will walk in there who have a ton of money and you can just name the price, whatever it is, they will buy that chair, and because they want it, because that's what they value. They value a piece of handmade, antique kind of style furniture with the most incredibly luxurious kind of fabrics on it that looks a certain way so they can put it in their house. And, some of those people who go in that shop may well make really cool food choices, and I love them if they do. But I bet a lot of them don't. I bet a lot of them like to go out and eat expensive foods, but don't make the choices that we know we all need to make in order to still be on this planet
in 50 years,
100 years time. Yeah.
In order that our kids
I'm slightly more hopeful than you. Yeah, exactly. And it's just, that just underlines to me how much it is about value completely. Yeah. It's not about how much money you've got at all.
No.
Now, obviously, that doesn't deny that there aren't equity issues in the world with people being able to access food, because there are, very definitely. But there are still a ton more issues that are nothing to do with money at all.
Yeah, there's a lot that you run into.
What I wanted to kind of pull out of what Amelia said, or where I wanted to start with it, was that she said, how do you change the minds of those who don't want to listen? And I think you cannot change the minds of those who don't want to listen.
I agree.
And the more you put your energy trying to change the minds of people who don't want to listen, the more frustrated and angry you are going to get. And the more you're probably going to get disheartened and not want to carry on doing what you're doing in terms of witnessing, what your lifestyle is in the world. So that's not a place to put energy. I feel, Amelia, because I have, something of a similar situation to her, in that my family, who have more money than Rob and I have, do not make food choices that I agree with. And I struggle going to be with them, even eating the food that they prepare for me. I mean, I do, because it's about communion and being with them and connection. But, if I was to stay with them for any length of time, it would be very difficult, because they make food choices that I just completely do not agree with, and they will not understand, or seem to not want to understand, the connection between the food choices and the things that are going on in the world. So they don't want to listen, and I can't influence them. I just know I can't. What I do think is that, as our society breaks down food-wise and industrial food production becomes more obviously bad, in that, people are getting ill and iller, and there are these push and pulls in people's lives. They're pushed to make a change because they're unhealthy, they're getting ill. And that is a big push, as anyone who has got ill knows. We've got patrons who have come to Ancestral Food. A lot of us have come to Ancestral Food because of illness, and it's pushed us. Right. Sometimes we get pulled towards something that we want instead of push. We get pulled towards we want to have more energy. How can we live to have more energy? Or we want a world where things are different. It feels to me that whatever energy there is in those directions in the world at the moment, there are a great deal of opportunities to find that information now. Mm-hmm. If you are having health problems, you can Google stuff, you can look for podcasts, you can go out and see things going on in the world. The people who believe in this sort of stuff are putting it out there, like we are. And so I feel like there are opportunities out there for reaching the people who are ready to hear. And it's only when they're ready to hear that those moments where we change become valid. Because if someone's not ready to hear, then it's just gonna, it's gonna be like seed falling onto rocky ground, as it were. And so as individuals, just the best thing we can do is just put ourselves out there as much as possible. And, providing that comes from passion and our deep held values, and we don't just keep banging our head up against people who don't want to listen, then we can continue to do that, and it doesn't have to be what you and I are doing and putting a podcast. It can just be going and volunteering at a farmer's market, and then you get to talk to people, something like that. I have an example of kind of how, from our experience of how this has worked in a way, that, we've been putting this podcast out for like 3 years now, and we did an episode a year or so back on my rye course. And there was a lady in northern Italy called Nicole whose husband had bought her a book on sourdough baking, and she knew that rye was used in northern Italy, in the kind of German area of northern Italy that she lived in the past, and she wanted to make a bread that was 100% rye, and she didn't see that in any of the books anywhere around her. And so she searched, and she found a link to our podcast episode on whole grain rye sourdough bread. Yeah. And she listened to it, and she did my course, and she then started making whole grain rye sourdough bread for her family, and then she listened to a load more podcast episodes. Mm-hmm. And that made her think about stuff, and then she joined as a Patreon. And I know, because I've read the review that she left the podcast, which is wonderful, yes, that so much of her life and what she's putting on her table has changed because of the involvement she's got with the Discord community and people and all the podcasts that she's listened to. And I'm sure that's led her on, and she was doing other research at the same time to other people that spurred her on to go and find other things, to find more books, to do more experimentation. Mm-hmm. And so that's a kind of an example of putting something out there, and when the right person is there at the right time, being able to meet them. I think another thing that's quite important in this sort of equation is that if we're going to put ourselves out there and be able to be the person that, meets the person who's ready, we need to know how to talk about our stuff. And so when questions are asked, we can answer it. And so there seems to me to be a kind of a call to practice talking about it. Talk to people who are open. Come on to Discord and talk to people about it. If you've got friends who you know have similar values, talk to them. Practice writing about it. I mean, that's how I find I best crystallize my views, is by writing. And I can sit and I can write what I believe about something, and that makes me think about it and get back to the nuts and bolts. And so when someone does approach you, you are well versed and you can give them everything they need to do. You can listen to them. You're not worried about what you're going to say next. You can listen to what they're actually asking and come back to them and give them something that will help them and move them forward. And it's interesting that, you know, when we started, like 3.5 years ago, I kind of knew that I was much more comfortable writing than I was talking. Rob's the talker in this family. Definitely. He just has the gift of the gab, as we say in the UK. I don't know if you say that.
We do.
And you do. Good. You understand then. And I don't, because I was brought up in a family where no one talked about anything. I wasn't asked anything. I wasn't asked to give my opinion. I just was never asked, and we never discussed anything. And so I grew up just not being able to. But I wrote when I was younger, and that's how I formulated my ideas. That's who I talked to, you know. And so when we started the podcast, I was like, oh gosh, I know I need to improve speaking. And I feel like this is stepping out of my comfort zone, because I just want to hide behind my writing. I don't want to talk because I might say the wrong thing. And I do feel like over the 3.5 years, although I'm still really nervous when someone puts me on the spot and when I come to record an episode, I do feel like my ability to talk on these topics, thanks to the discussions I've had with you, thanks to what I've learned from you, thanks to what I've learned from the research I've done and from the patrons, I feel as if I can speak more succinctly on my point. And that, I feel, has helped me. You know, if someone comes up and asks me something, I feel better able to explain what I mean than I could 3.5 years ago. Now, so obviously not everyone can just go and do a podcast 3.5 years, but any opportunity that you have to get super clear on what you believe and what it is that you value and what it is that you want to change in the world and how you want that change to happen, and the things that light you up about it, then take that opportunity to get clear on those things, because when the opportunity's there, you'll be able to really engage with someone. I think that's about my response to the question, and just to feel that I feel Amelia, and I know that so many people listening, all the patrons listening, will have experienced what Amelia has experienced, and to keep going. And I know we have no choice; we have to keep going because it's what we believe in, isn't it? You know, we can't stop.
There's a story that I thought of when I saw this. A story in the Bible where a man throws a wedding feast and he invites all his guests and none of them show up. And so he tells his servants, go out into the street and invite anybody who will come. And I think about that all the time with things like this, because sometimes the person that you really wanted to be there, they just don't care. And instead of spending all the time trying to convince those guests to come, he said, you know what? Let's invite somebody else. Go get the people that want to be here. And with nagging and guilting, which is something we could do, and we've probably all tried at some point. And I definitely know I did more of that in the beginning when I was sort of new to this. And I don't know if it's because I was feeling guilt, like, oh no, I didn't do this for so long. I didn't know about this. And now I'm going to pass my guilt on to you because you're not doing it. But it doesn't work. And there's there's another Bible verse that I thought of immediately when I saw this, when she said, I've even tried guilting my family. And it's a verse that says, it is the goodness of God that draws men to repentance. And I immediately thought, it's the beauty and the life and the vitality and the interest of the food that draws people to change, not the guilt
completely.
over carbon sequestration or temperatures or something. We can try to just use the guilt aspect, but instead,
that's why I don't really like to engage with that kind of thing.
No, me neither.
I learn what I need to learn, but I don't want to engage with people or books or things that kind of talk about that, because it brings me down. And I know that stuff. I know how important it is, but I want to engage people with joy and passion, and bring that out, because that's the thing that will last, and that's the thing that's not guilt. That's the thing that will push them forwards without them even needing to try to propel themselves,
Yeah.
At least that's how it's happened to me.
No, I agree with you completely. And I thought of you as well, because I thought how you always go from the joy and creativity led aspect of things. And certainly when people change because of nagging or guilt, it's not usually a permanent change. And two, they tend to resent the person who dragged them into it, as they feel. Because now it feels like, I did this for you so that I don't feel guilty anymore. Instead of, this was so irresistible that I couldn't stop myself from doing it this way.
Yeah.
And that's where I want people to be. And it's part of why I loved having my Instagram, was because I could just share things in a way that looked so appealing. I'm not sharing on Instagram now, just mostly sharing in Discord, or on the podcast, obviously. But I think sharing the life and vigor that this has brought to us is what will be more interesting to people than if we tell them, again, you're such a bad person because you were born into a culture that completely indoctrinated you on a way to eat, and you're absolutely held captive by these food companies that intentionally engineer addiction. How dare you? We, but for the grace of God, there go I. That would be all of us, or was all of us at some point. And
completely.
And we all kind of had our epiphany and our revelation, and think back to when we started changing out and how confusing everything was, and how it was like, soaking grains. I'm so confused. What do you mean? And how we had so much to learn, and our biases that we had not even a clue that we had those biases and things like that. So, and then just giving grace to people as they do change. If somebody comes to you and says that they are starting to make their own beer, and that they're using, a single bacteria inoculant, don't just crap on their excitement and say, well, guess what? You suck, because, just share in their excitement and let them want to come back to you and tell you, oh, now I heard this episode on a podcast and I ordered barley, if you're just gonna, I'm not saying Amelia is, but just generally, if somebody's going to shoot down somebody's little teeny tiny microscopic successes, like I bought eggs that were brown instead of eggs that were white, you might think, they both came from a factory. What's the point? But they're trying and they're learning. And sometimes it's really, really small things. But I was fully, processed food, restaurant food, all of the things, didn't give them a question until I read a book about tomatoes. And then I bought organic tomatoes. That is not a very big step, but I had to turn, from the slightly cheaper tomato and look at the slightly more expensive tomato, both in the grocery store, I'll add. And that was how I had to start. And if somebody was like, well, there's really no point in you doing that because, by the way, we only have 60 harvests left. So you really need to make a bigger effort. I could have just been so discouraged.
Yeah.
But fortunately, nobody did that.
Yay. And now you're here with me.
And now we're on a podcast. We don't even know how many years into it we are.
Yeah, I know. But at some point, I'll check when we started. I don't know when it was.
We probably should know that.
I hope, Amelia, that goes some way to helping answer your question. And just know that I feel you for sure. And what Andrea just said about the story with the wedding, that made me get goose pimples when you said it, Andrea, because, I know in my past that I've just kept knocking on that door of the people that I wanted to invite and got nowhere. And I know how much it hurts and yet throwing open the doors and putting that invitation out to people who
look at all the patrons who walked through the door.
Exactly.
I mean, that's not even listeners. That's just the people who went the step farther, to also financially support the podcast and pay for the equipment and
thank you
and the hosting and everything like that. That's incredible. Whereas if you were still trying to get your family to send you $5 to start or pounds or whatever you guys use for your money these days, and hence, I don't know. Then
we use peas now.
Peas, okay. Oh, they're trading peas. You'd still be trying, and your effort would be wasted. But look, when Amelia goes into the patron group or when she's on the live and she says something, everybody's captivated by it. Because it's the audience is ready to hear, like you said, that soil. Gary was we've thrown out so much grass seed as we're building these new pastures and trying to build up good grasses. And, some of the seed he's throwing and it goes onto this really rich, the soil where we had the cows and it's all kind of churned up and all those just sprout up so quickly. And then some of it falls onto this kind of clayish, hardish soil that's farther back. It's more shaded. It's more wet. It's growing, but really slowly. And some of it lands on the driveway and the guinea fowl they pop right on down. They pick those up and they eat it. He doesn't even have a chance. Yeah. And if he spent all his time going over and over the driveway, trying to, cultivate grass on the rocky driveway, some of it would grow eventually. But how much better for him to be able to just focus on that good soil and see the fruits of his labors immediately returned, sevenfold rather than, mostly picked up by the guinea fowl and just struggling to survive.
There's one other thing that's just struck me about this, which is if you have the opportunity, look around to team up with someone else.
Oh.
Because if I hadn't done this podcast with you, this podcast would not reach as many people as it does. Right. Would not have reached as many people as it does.
I'm so famous.
And, exactly. Because you're such an influencer.
Oh, what? And I'm going to get those big lips anytime now.
You brought, many things to the table that I haven't been able to and continue to. And that not only has enriched what we're offering, but it's also made the offering more appealing to lots of other people. And that feels bigger than it would have been if either of us had done it on our own. And so, look around you and see who else has the same values as you. See what you can do with them. Because I think that has a far bigger reach than what you might be able to do just by yourself.
Synergy. People say to me, wow, you've done this podcast for so long. And I tell them, if I was doing this on my own, it probably would have lasted for 2 weeks. I just couldn't. But I said, Alison is there. She had this big vision. And when somebody, it's like people say, have a workout buddy, Yeah. When somebody's there on the other side waiting for you, you don't just roll back over and go to sleep. You say, oh, they're waiting for me. So you get up, and you and you go respond, and then you can engage. And so I think that that's really good advice, what you said.
Shall we call it a day there? Because we're well over the hour. It's been a really rich discussion.
I haven't even looked at the clock. Just went to a
All I can tell is that my stomach's starting to rumble, so it makes me think that it's nearly dinner time.
Better take that sign. Yep.
Exactly.
We better go. Oh, I want to go eat some of that. I could hear Gary heating up the
That's perfect timing.
So yeah.
Wonderful. It was such a really good discussion today, Andrea. Thank you.
Yeah, good talking to you, Alison. See you next time.
Thank you very much, Patreons, for looking after us.
Yes, thank you for taking care of us, and no KTC episode like this for the next 2 months, July and August, as Alison and I
with a vengeance.
Basically reorganize our lives. We'll be right back.
We'll be back. We'll be back with
more messages.
Looking the same from the outside, but different on the inside. In September.
We're exciting.
Cool.
All right. Bye, Alison.
Bye for now, Andrea. Bye.
If you'd like to support the podcast, you can join as a patron. Choose from various levels starting at $5. You can see what we offer at ancestralkitchenpodcast.com.
While you're there, check out our favourite books, supplements and kitchenware, or give a one-time donation.
Leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts.
And if you know someone who would love our show, tell them about us.
You are helping to bring ancestral food wisdom into modern kitchens, changing the world one plate at a time.